Hi, everyone. Welcome to our webinar. We are so excited for this conversation with Dr. Tré and Dr. Anna, and we are so excited for you guys. If you have any questions that pop up during the conversation, feel free to put it in the Q&A section below, and we will get those answered at the end of the conversation. Yeah, I'm going to pass it on to Sade so she can read Tré's bio.
Hello, everyone, and welcome, and thank you for being here. I am Tré Watkins now. I'm recently married, and I am going to read the bio of Dr. Tré Watkins. So, Tré Watkins is a native of Southeast San Diego, dedicated to transforming lives and communities through education, mentorship, and research. He is the Director of Career Services at Point Loma Nazarene University, where he also serves as a lecturer and teaches in the School of Leadership and Education Sciences, also known as SOLS at the University of San Diego. Tré earned a BA in psychology from California State San Bernardino and a master's in sociology from Arizona State University and a PhD in education for social justice from the University of San Diego. His research agenda focuses on the sociology of higher education with particular attention to Black student experiences and college students' career readiness. In the classroom, Tré specializes in research methods with an emphasis on qualitative approaches. Tré is a proud member of Phi Beta Sigma Fraternity Incorporated and serves as the alumni advisor for the Lambda Iota chapter at San Diego State University. Outside of work, he enjoys spending time with his family. He's a proud father of 6 and is an avid book lover and lifelong Harry Potter fan with the tattoos to prove it. And Tré is passionate about learning, teaching, and writing, and is deeply committed to making a meaningful impact in his community and beyond. So that is his intro. I am the wife, if you notice the last name. And I also forgot to introduce myself. I am the executive director for the San Diego Lactation Equity Alliance. And this is Charlie Bell.
Thanks, Sade. All right, I will go ahead and read Anna's bio. Dr. Anna is a 2 times New York Times best-selling author and TED speaker. Dr. Anna Tubbs holds a PhD in sociology and an MPhil in multidisciplinary gender studies from the University of Cambridge. After growing up abroad in Dubai, Mexico, Sweden, Estonia, and Azerbaijan, Anna is inspired to bring people together across differences through her powerful storytelling. She recently signed a major 2-book deal. She's developing an unscripted show with BET on the mothers of contemporary Black icons and is now trying her hand at screenwriting. Thank you so much, Tré and Anna, for being here. We're so excited to just listen in on this beautiful conversation that's about to happen.
Thank you for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
Thank you.
Same. Thank you, Leandra. Thank you, Sade, for those wonderful bios. Good morning, everyone. My name is Tré Watkins. I'm absolutely humbled, honored, and thrilled to be here today and grateful for folks showing up. It's a Monday, mid-morning. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you are here with us, and we appreciate that. And I'm ecstatically grateful for the time of our guests, the prolific author, scholar, Renaissance woman, 2-time New York Times best-selling author, Dr. Malaika Tubbs, as we discuss themes from her life's work and books, The Three Mothers and Your Race, and how they relate to our work here at the San Diego Lactation Equity Alliance, where our vision is for a world with healthier families and communities through equitable access to lactation support. I also want to give a special shout out to our amazing, our trailblazing, our visionary executive director, Mrs. Tré Watkins. None of this is possible without her. And yes, I'm talking about the event that we're having right now that she manifested into fruition. I'm also talking about our work at the Alliance, specifically and more generally birth work in the San Diego region, where Tré has dedicated over 10 years of service as a doula, a birth navigator, IBCLC, elected official, and most importantly, a mother, in fighting for folks from marginalized communities in our hometown. And I'm also talking about myself because none of the titles mean more to me than being Tré Bell's husband. And none of this is possible without her love, her support, and her drive. I get to be I'm here at my office while she's there with the baby, right? And so, I'm just so grateful that she has chosen me to be her partner in this work and in life. And she's never going to take the credit she deserves. So I'm going to make sure she gets that acknowledgement. So the purpose of this talk is really twofold. One, I want to introduce to our audience, which is a mixture of birth worker practitioners of all sorts, advocates, community members, mothers, and have dialogue around some of the themes from her books that intersect with our work in maternal health justice. So I'm going to ask Anna a few questions. Please feel free to put questions in the chat, and we'll save time to answer a few of those at the end. Sound good? Cool. So before we dive into the books, and if you haven't gotten them already, Three Mothers Erased, they are fantastic. They are amazing. Brilliant work. And I believe we're giving some away. I'll let Leandra Charday talk about that at the end. But I want to start by grounding us in who you are. Your writing blends personal storytelling, deep historical research, and a global perspective. Can you share a bit about your background, your international experiences, your academic journey, and how all of that has shaped the way you see American life and motherhood?
Absolutely. Oh, I'm so grateful to be here. And that was such a beautiful tribute to your wife. I love your partnership. I think it's just really inspiring. So I just want to say that, first of all, it's wonderful to see this partnership and with such important work among both of you. So my background, I was born in the US, but I spent most of my life abroad. I was raised by two parents who wanted their kids to see as much of the world as possible. And they were lawyers, and so they kind of took any job. If it came up in a place that they hadn't been, they would do a temporary teaching position or consult on a project so that we could travel there, my siblings and I. And so I grew up in places like Dubai, Estonia, Sweden, Azerbaijan, as you heard in the bio. And my dad is from Ghana, so we spent a lot of time in Ghana and kind of going back and forth wherever we lived. And I say all of that because it made me a student of different places and very aware of how storytelling impacts everything that we do, how the most dominant voices are the ones that are often taken as the truth and are left unquestioned. And it made me very aware of the need to question those dominant voices and see who's being left out, who's being ignored. I'm very aware of propaganda. I have a great propaganda radar. And I was also heavily influenced by the fact that my mom felt like everything in any place could be related back to how mothers were treated in those different places. And so she always said if mothers are being supported and protected and their role is being seen with the respect that it deserves, that you would see ripple effects for that community where people were healthier and happier and thriving, and that the opposite was also true. If you saw mothers being disrespected or unappreciated or not being given the supports that they deserved, that you would also see kind of cycles of inequity, injustice, poverty, a lot of painful realities. And so she felt like everything related back to the treatment of this person who was in the role of stewarding the beginning of our lives and beyond. And so I was always inspired by her work advocating for women and children in the US as well as abroad, and then became a student of the world myself. So that's kind of my personal background that led into why I wanted to study what I did when I went into my higher education journey. And in undergrad, I studied anthropology because it's just the study of culture, and it just felt like an extension of what I already naturally did. And then I wanted to understand better how gender was impacting all of our lives. And so I did my master's in gender studies. And then sociology felt like the perfect way to round off my work and speak specifically about how culture and gender impact our societies at large. So that's my background, and I'm a mother of three. I have three beautiful babies under the age of 5.5. So I have my 5.5-year-old. He takes that half very seriously, so that's why I say the half. And then my 3.5-year-old, and I have a 19-month-old.
Thank you. And the half is very important, very serious. Um, and the career services professional me couldn't help but seeing how these different threads, not only personal but academic, come together so beautifully in your work. You mentioned storytelling, and one of the things I appreciated most about your work is how it weaves together this deep, rigorous research with vulnerability and personal narrative, which you don't often see in these types of work. And you share stories about your mother, your family, your own journey through motherhood, and the power of storytelling to restore what has been lost. Why do you think it's important for you to write in this way, and how do you see storytelling as a tool for both truth telling and connection, especially for women and mothers?
There's so much that I want to say about that. I think for me, it's really important to be vulnerable in our storytelling so that our readers can be vulnerable as well and can kind of go on that journey with you. I also, yes, I am a proud nerd. I love research, but I don't like books that are boring. And so I always have wanted to write in ways that are approachable and accessible. And that doesn't mean that I'm dumbing anything down. It just means that I don't hide behind academic jargon or performance. And I'm not trying to prove how smart I am to anybody. I more so am interested in how many different people I can connect with. And I think people connect with other people's stories. And so that has always been a priority in my work, is to make sure that I'm being authentic and that I'm showing parts of myself so that people can feel like they trust me as a storyteller. And because I want more people to see themselves as storytellers as well. And I don't want it to feel like something that's unattainable, but something that is a tool for us to understand each other. And especially when it comes to race and gender theory, I think academics have often co-opted that theory and made it inaccessible for people on purpose, because it can then feel very exclusive. And then we feel, like we really admire these academics, but we don't fully understand, nor do we have the ability to engage with their work. And I never wanted to be that type of academic. And so I'm always proudest when somebody says, I really enjoyed the read. I really kept coming back to the pages. I liked the language that was used, and it reads almost like a novel sometimes, because that journey of reading for my audience is something that I'm thinking about on every single page. I don't want it to feel like work and homework to come to my projects ever.
Yeah, and I love you mentioning the word accessibility, right? Making sure the audiences whose uh, the work impacts the most have access to it and can relate to it in various ways. And the storytelling definitely brings that through. In line with that, you're in conversation with a powerful lineage of Black thinkers and writers um, who do similar works. You reference authors like Isabel Wilkerson and Ibn Kendi, and your work itself is, again, deeply accessible, deeply grounded, also deeply ambitious in its scope. That's the first. As soon as I started reading your race, I was like, this is ambitious. I'll also say that so you name those authors specifically, and those authors have won National Book Awards for their work. So just putting that out there, but this work sits right there in conversation with them. And so I want to ask, and this is my nerdy book question that I promised I would get in. Which books or thinkers feel like home for you, and how do you see your writing as part of a larger tradition of reclaiming Black stories and shaping public understanding of Black issues?
I love that question so much. And I'm so honored anytime anybody puts me in conversation with these authors. I admire them deeply. I am such a huge fan of these different authors. And a few of them I've been able to meet in person, and I'm always just blown away, especially if somehow I'm on a panel with them. I feel like it's some kind of dream and it doesn't really fully make sense to me. But yes, I always love Isabel Wilkerson. Her work is just incredible. I think the way that she weaves in everything we've talked about, that personal narrative with these human stories that are so beautifully told, that I think are very accessible, especially something like Caste, where she's diving into this history of how American racism is a caste system. And she makes that undeniable in her argument. But in these short chapters that you can kind of read one at a time and feel equipped to speak about these concepts in a way that we previously might have had a hard time doing so. I think she just gives us those tools and that language that we need to also make that undeniable case for what we're witnessing and what we're experiencing on a day-to-day basis. So Warmth of Other Suns was a huge inspiration for me, especially in writing The Three Mothers, where I'm also writing about three different people's stories and bringing them together in this kind of triple biography. And then with Cast, it feels like a direct comparison to what I'm trying to accomplish in Erased. And then Ibram Kendi, I absolutely love his work as well. He leans more on the academic side than I do, but I think it is a perfect way of showing that different writers can kind of come together and put our works out there so that they're complementary of each other. And he definitely, especially in Stamped from the Beginning, goes on such a deep academic dive. And I do think sometimes some of the language is a little inaccessible, but he also is great at working around that and getting other work out there, like for young readers. And his most recent book about Malcolm X is specifically for teenage readers. So that is also very inspiring to me. Margot Lee Shetterly is another author. She wrote Hidden Figures, which went on to become, of course, that incredible film. And so I also am always thinking of how can I walk in those footsteps and meet other audience members who might not necessarily come to a book, but would come to a movie, let's say about the three mothers that I write about in my first book, or to a screen version of something like Erased. How do we get more people in conversation with each other and thinking about these different concepts? And then, of course, I'm always inspired by our late writers like Audre Lorde and Bell Hooks. And I feel so honored to carry forward a Black feminist legacy that just allows us to see our lives more clearly. And we're constantly relating what they said. They were always so prophetic to our own lives. So it doesn't feel like some separate, just kind of academic question that somebody's asking, but instead, how do we live every day? And when we interact with their works, do we live differently? Do we see ourselves differently? Do we see other people differently? And yeah, I just feel very, very inspired to be a part of that. And so anytime my books make it on any list with these other books, I'm honored. And I hope to continue to make those authors proud. Professor Kendi wrote a blurb for The Three Mothers, so that meant so much to me. Clint Smith wrote a blurb for Erased, and that meant so much to me. So did Alicia Garza, Tarana Burke. So yeah, I want to make them proud as well as my audience members proud and just continue this legacy of making our lives feel more understandable and bring more hope to moments that can feel so dark and so heavy like we're experiencing right now.
Absolutely. And it's again, both texts are much needed let's say beams or flashlights, right, in a dark current situation. But again, actually, I gotta ask: do you view yourself as a historian? None of your degrees are in history, but these texts both are so rooted in research and history. These authors that you mentioned and are in conversation with are historians, right? Do you view yourself as a historian? And then also, why is it important to in understanding that history to understand what we're dealing with today?
Yeah, it's interesting because people do often describe me as a historian, even if my degrees are not in history. But yeah, I do see myself as a historian. I am always thinking about the ways in which we've arrived where we are today. And you can't do that without going back into understanding the structures. And so while I'm more, I guess, of like a social commentator of what we're experiencing currently, it always takes us back to understanding just the way in which we arrived here. And so it feels like we all should be historians. I almost feel like it's impossible to do any work that we do, even, especially in birth work. You can't know, why it is that we've arrived at such a horrible state of maternal health in the United States if you're not willing to study how Black motherhood has been treated throughout American history, for example. And I just think, I hope it allows more of us to realize the importance of studying that history, because that's also why our history is so attacked all the time, and why, books are banned, or why people try to erase our traces of connecting our history to our current moment, is because the more we understand that, the more we understand this. And I really attribute a lot of my passion for maintaining and conserving history, and also correcting the record of history, to my father, because he was very big on teaching us about the legacies that we carry, but also you must always know how something came to be now, that it didn't just start today. And so, for instance, in this very dark national moment with what we're seeing in this current administration, a lot of people find themselves very surprised by everything they're witnessing. But if you're a student of history, it's not surprising. It's actually very predictable, which also allows us to know how you stand up in moments like this, because you've studied the people who have resisted. You've studied the people who have always been able to see beyond the propaganda. And it also just equips us. It's not only about understanding how we got here, it's to prepare us for what we're facing right now.
Absolutely. And then in your first book, The Three Mothers, it brings Alberta King, Bernice Baldwin, and Louise Little. Folks might be familiar with their sons, Martin Luther King Jr., James Baldwin, and Malcolm X. It brings them out of the footnotes and into full view. Their mothering shaped movements and shaped the world, and yet history has pushed them out into the margins. Why was it important for you to center these mothers, and how do you see their stories reflecting the broader pattern of how Black motherhood has been ignored, devalued, or just erased?
Yeah. Oh man, it was very shocking to me, to be honest, when I started writing that book. I started writing it in 2017. I was shocked that nobody else had written that book yet. Even if just, let's say, somebody had written a book just about Alberta King, MLK Jr.'s mother, and that hadn't happened, was shocking to me. And it really just made it clear how little we value mothers and their contributions and their influence on our lives and their influence on our national and international history. When you think about the fact that every January we celebrate MLK Day, and it's around January 15th because that's the day he was born. And very few people, if anybody else, had asked who else was in the room the day that he was born. Perhaps the woman who birthed him. And that was like this mind-blowing concept for a lot of people, versus we should have all wondered who she was and how she accomplished what she accomplished. And so when I started to think about that book, I initially just wanted to do something that was an ode to mothers, and Black mothers in particular. And I wanted to carry on that legacy of Margot Lee Shetterly and Hidden Figures, and find other hidden figures. And so I knew I was going to talk about Black mothers who had been erased in history, but obviously that left this very large I guess all the plethora of options of people I could choose from, because so many of us are erased. And I thought, okay, how can I get enough people to this book to learn about Black mothering and to learn about a legacy of Black mothering in United States history? And I thought if I did something around MLK, a lot of people would come to it, whether it was because they wanted to sincerely learn about the mother or because they wanted to learn more about the son. But either way, they would walk away knowing more about Black women and Black mothers. And so I kind of used patriarchy as the hook there. And then I thought, okay, let me also talk about some other mothers so that we can kind of compare their experiences of mothering, Black mothering in the United States. And of course, Malcolm X felt like a kind of natural second, because those men are so often put in conversation with each other. But I didn't want to do just two, because when there's only two people involved in anything, we often see them as opposites of each other. It's just kind of something we naturally do. I mean, for any parents who have maybe two children, you might notice that other people often try to think of, oh, she's the loud one and he's the quiet one, or they make statements like that. It's always as if they're opposites, versus thinking of, if you introduce a third kind of factor, we start to see more of a spectrum of identities. So I knew I was going to do three moms. I chose Bernice Baldwin and James Baldwin for many reasons. One of them being because he was a queer man, and I really wanted to explore his relationship with his mother. And also because when I was starting to write this book, I Am Not Your Negro came out, which was a documentary based off of some of the unpublished writings of James Baldwin. And in it, he talks about how he's a witness to the lives of his friends, Martin, Malcolm, and Medgar Evers. And then for a second, I was like, maybe I'll do four mothers, but it felt like too much. So I did the three. And they obviously show, I mean, when I had the question to research them, I didn't have the goal of arguing that they did what their sons did. I wasn't trying to prove that. I was just trying to ask, who are these women? And I knew that their lives had to be interesting. You know, Black women born in the early 1900s, they have these sons in the 1920s, all of them do, and their sons go on to become these famous leaders. There's an interesting story. That was my question. What is that story? But every piece of information that I found about them, and you have to remember that this book is like 90% my original research. There was so little out there about them. So I had to go and piece their life stories together kind of from scratch, basically. But every piece of information that I found about them, it was as if I was finding information about the son. It was as if the mother was the exact same person as the son. You know, Alberta King participated in marches and in boycotts. Her parents were the leaders of Ebenezer Baptist Church. She grew up in the church. She grew up knowing that your faith was always intertwined with social justice. That's almost the exact same description of her son. Then with Louise Little, I start to find that she's this radical activist who believes in Black independence by any means necessary, and Black pride and never bowing down to your oppressor. And she was a part of the UNIA Marcus Garvey movement. And there's these direct ties between Marcus Garvey and the Nation of Islam. So it's as if we're describing Malcolm as I'm finding all of these details about his mother. And then Bertis Baldwin was a writer, and she believed in the power of language and how you could help people make it through their own struggles and pain by gifting them these letters filled with lessons on love and light and healing. And again, it's almost as if I'm describing James Baldwin when I'm finding these pieces of information about his mother. And so I say all of that because then the erasure of them is so clear and so strategic, because you can't actually know these three famous sons if you didn't know that they inherited it from their mothers, if you didn't know that they were, even the sons say, I was walking in my mother's footsteps, and historians and scholars before me just ignored that and left that entirely out of the story, when in The Three Mothers in my book, I include those quotes where you see Malcolm, Martin, and James saying, my mother taught me this. And so it is symbolic of the larger erasure of all of us, because if even in these three famous people's lives, nobody asked who were the women, then imagine what that's like for us on a day-to-day basis as Black mothers in America.
Absolutely. And I'll say that I like the line, the patriarchy as a hook, and it worked for me. Those three figures have a very special place in my life. Both Sade and I's dads share a birthday with Martin Luther King
Oh,
Jr.
wow.
Jimmy is my North Star as a writer and social critic. And then Malcolm X is probably the most historical figure to who I am as a thinker and as an activist. And I appreciate the thoughtfulness in not putting Malcolm and Martin against each other, because they absolutely were not. That's often how the stories are told. We know that's a tool of white supremacy. But putting Jimmy and his mother in that conversation as well, right, shows the well-roundedness of both of those figures. And one thing that those three mothers experience, not only again they are the reasons that we know who their sons are, but they also experience trauma and tragedy. And in thinking about the Black maternal health crisis, which most of our audience is familiar with, statistics are well known, but it's still devastating. How do you understand the role of patriarchy in shaping the systems that continue to endanger Black mothers today, especially when it intersects with race and class?
Yeah, I have to go all the way back to how I'm defining patriarchy in this book, because what I'm presenting in the definition is not different than what we've seen before, but more complete than what we've seen before in the definition of patriarchy. And so when I'm saying American patriarchy, I'm saying this is a system that our founding fathers wrote into the Constitution that started as their mere opinion and that also came as a result of their fear of losing power and control in a nation that they had won during the Revolutionary War. And so it's this group of men, we've heard, they were these scrappy young men who win the revolution. And they then see the revolutionary spirit spreading across the nation. And so they have this deep fear that they're going to lose power and control. And so they say, how do we build this nation in a way where we get to keep that power? And so they define what it is to be human in the US through the Constitution. And they first define what it is to be man. And so in the Constitution, we know that to be man is to be able to own land. To be man is to be able to vote and to represent yourself in business decisions without anyone having to represent you. And they leave women entirely out of the Constitution. But just from that point right there, we'll stop there for a second. We see that they're not including all men, right? We're not including men who were enslaved. They're not including their indigenous counterparts. They're not including immigrant men from that point onward, right? Because obviously many of them were immigrants themselves, if not all of them. And they are not even really including poor white men, but they're kind of setting it up to say, this is the goal of manhood in the United States. Then in letters that they're writing to the daughters in their lives, their partners, we then see how they're defining womanhood in the United States. They're defining womanhood as those who cannot vote, but should be protected because women can't think for themselves, they can't represent themselves, and that the only thing that the women in their lives can do is reproduce that power of manhood through children, and that legacy and that status through their children. But obviously in that definition, we're seeing that a lot of people are missing and are not being included either, particularly Black women who are enslaved, because during slavery, we see in the law that Black women are told that no matter how they come to have children, those children are always going to carry the status of the mother. So even if, and we know there's these horrible ways in which Black women come to have children during times of slavery, that child is always going to carry the status of the Black mother. And so we see even in just that example that Black women are the ones that are pushed furthest away from the protections that are afforded by this very problematic binary and this flawed definition of what it means to be human in the United States. But everybody who's been excluded from that is told to try to assimilate to that so that they can be treated as human beings in the United States. And so all of that then leads us into the complete dehumanization of Black women. And I'm arguing in the book how this gender binary and patriarchy is used to further this caste system that we've talked about with Isabel Wilkerson's book. And it keeps Black people from being gendered, from being able to access these gendered identities, where our nuclear families are constantly interrupted, where our relationships are not respected, where motherhood in particular is not respected, where children can be removed from their mothers and mothers can be removed from their children, and that by law, Black women are not birthing humans, but instead they're birthing somebody else's property. That was written in law, that this is not a child or a human being, this is somebody else's property. And so that also sets us up to start to see, obviously, many of the horrific circumstances we're still seeing to this day. We then also see, and I talk about in the book, three men in particular, who want to take control of birthing in the United States, and that they don't trust midwifery, then they don't trust midwives, and they want to remove midwives from the process of birth in the United States. And so there's one, the father of obstetrics, his name is Joseph D. Lee. He felt that birthing was a horrific process that was detrimental to the baby and to the child, and that it needed more medicine and that men could help women make it through this process that didn't previously include him. So it's this desire to control that we talked about. There's also the father of gynecology, which many of us have heard of, J. Marion Sims, who perfects his treatments by experimenting on Black women and girls who were enslaved by cutting into them without any anesthesia. So he's replicating this notion that they are not human and they don't deserve to be treated as human beings. And then there's the father of modern medicine. And he believed basically that in some ways he improves medical care in the United States because he tries to get everybody to sort of be on the same page across the United States. But one of the things that he also is very suspicious of is midwifery. And so all three of these men make it possible for midwives to be vilified in the United States, for it to be legal for midwives to do what they had done since the beginning of time, even though midwives were very willing to share their knowledge with doctors, to share what their wisdoms were and their practices were. When it becomes medicalized, we see immediately higher mortality rates at the very beginning, because these doctors at the beginning were just experimenting with many different treatments, and they didn't even know how to prevent sepsis. They didn't know how to prevent infant mortality or the mortality of mothers. And so all of this then starts to become the basis of how we see not only women's bodies, but very specifically Black women's bodies in the United States, that leads us to where we are today, where even if a doctor that you're seeing is a Black woman, if she's been trained in that system and in that history, that not only one sees all women in need of control and sees all births as something awful that needs to be medicalized, but also sees Black women as less than human and seeing them as being able to experience more pain than the average person, then it makes a lot of sense how we've arrived at a horrific state where this is a maternal mortality crisis across the board, and that disproportionately affects Black women. And I say it that way because I think, sadly, nationally, people are so numb to the pain of Black womanhood that if we say the Black maternal health crisis, a lot of people think they're like, well, it doesn't really impact us. And people need to know across the board, it is deadly to have children in the United States. And of course, we then see that further magnified for a group that has been dehumanized from the beginning. So that's how I map it in the book, and make it very clear. If you're comparing our numbers to other industrialized nations, one of the very first things that will come up is that in these other nations, midwifery is used just as much, if not more, than obstetrics. And obstetrics is seen more as when you need intervention. If something happens that goes differently than it typically does, then there are interventions in place. And we can say, thank God for those interventions when we need them. That's wonderful. Yes, those interventions have sometimes definitely saved lives. But when you employ those when they're not necessary, when you see every birthing person is as if they're diseased and something's wrong from the very beginning, then you're going to complicate a process and you're going to introduce factors that weren't necessary to begin with. And then you see so many mothers, even those who survive, feeling like something wasn't explained correctly to them. We can obviously go into how much money can be made off of birthing bodies, that you can make more money if there's a C-section performed, if an induction is started, if Pitocin is given, et cetera, et cetera. The list goes on. And so sadly, women, mothers, birthing people have been caught in not only this history of patriarchy, but also how it intersects with capitalism and generally a belief that women can't think for themselves, represent themselves, and that they have no idea what's going on with their own bodies and they need somebody else to tell them what to do.
And I appreciate that you mentioned midwives specifically. You write and erased about midwives and doulas with deep respect. You shared a story about having three doulas at your first birth, and how hospital staff responded just to their presence, and the difference between how the doulist treated you and encouraged you versus the nurse's comments. And my wife, she's a semi-retired doula, created such an incredible intentional birthing environment for us, and with music, lighting, and a birth plan. And even though nothing went as it was expected, these touches made a huge difference. And I appreciate you talking about patriarchy and racism and their intersections, and how they both stem from elite white men's fear,
Yeah.
and their intention to control movement, and thinking of breastfeeding. Right, you talk about how patriarchy has historically tried to control breastfeeding, something that men physically cannot do. And you ask how patriarchy has politicized reproduction to maintain power. Can you talk more about the control and how reclaiming the right to feed and nurture our children is part of reclaiming power itself?
Absolutely. It's in every part of our lives, American patriarchy, if we understand this like original social order that a lot of people either consciously but also subconsciously are trying to protect and maintain, then you see it play out in every stage of life, but particularly around experiences where so much depends on our ability to hear ourselves and our intuition. Mothering, parenting more generally, but especially birthing, mothering, all of that is so, it's part of us being able to hear ourselves and listen to what we feel is best for ourselves and for our children. And that's something that American patriarchy does not agree with and can never align with. So you're going to constantly be told, we know better, or we're going to kind of shift things around. And if you look particularly at breastfeeding and the history of that in the US, it has shifted around throughout American history depending on what served American patriarchy best. And so, at the beginning, you have women who are enslaved being forced to nurse white children. Then you have this belief that, okay, we need to domesticate white women again, so we're going to tell them that they have to nurse. And that then you're going to go and say, oh, it's actually something that like lower class people do is nurse. And so everybody else, like the higher class people, you should be on formula. That's the thing that we get to do. And then you see this return to, oh, we actually need more women to work outside of the home. So again, formula. So there's just this constant. And now I would say we're at a state where, on one hand, women are being told you should nurse up to 2 years. And those of you who don't nurse and don't have, things like parental leave, that you're not choosing the healthiest option for your child, and how terrible it is that you're on formula and all of this. So we're just vilifying people constantly, no matter what, so that it feels like women cannot win whatever it is that we do. And so, if we do nurse out, let's say in public, then people are like, cover yourself up. What are you doing? It's just to control. It's this constant control, no matter what we do and no matter what we choose. And so for me, what I'm arguing in the book is I want us to be able to return more to being able to hear ourselves and what will work best for our family. And it's not the same across the board. Especially because we don't have access to things on a national level that would make it the same across the board. Some of us have certain privileges. For instance, I have a flexible career, so I could be at home. I didn't have to return to an office. I could basically determine how long I was going to be on my leave. And that allowed for me to be able to nurse all 3 of my kids. I co-slept with all 3 of my kids. I didn't have any need to get them on like a schedule, right, that would serve capitalism more than my children and more than my family. But that's not something that I could say that everybody has to do, because one, some women have a really hard time nursing. For some women, it's well researched that it actually triggers a lot of anxiety for them. There's different bodies and different needs. And so I want us to be in a position where all of us can choose what works best for us with the information that we have available to us. It's the same with birthing experiences. I don't think that every woman has to give birth unmedicated. I think that we should have access to information about everything that's being offered to us so that when we make a decision, we feel like we were well informed and it's something that we agreed with and we weren't sort of being manipulated into something beyond what would serve us. And so that's always what I'm advocating for. But I think, yes, you can see it very clearly in nursing and the way it's shifted, not to serve women, but to serve what was best for this kind of patriarchal system that always relies on capitalism also to survive. And so I hope for, and I'm working for, even within my books and my advocacy, for a nation where we can all make decisions that align with what feels right to us, and that feels best for our bodies and for our children. And so I can always speak to how my experiences went, and I am grateful that what I envisioned for myself has been how I've been able to parent my children. But it's also, I'm well aware that on a national level, we're not set up for everybody to be able to choose what works best for them. And so I want to be able to shift more towards that.
And you're doing that. I appreciate you sharing your vision for what it looks like to have a world where mothers have access to that support and services. And I know these conversations can sometimes feel heavy. It's easy to get caught up in the pain and injustices, but I find value in understanding how these systems work and studying what has worked in the past. Um, my final question, just what would it look like for maternal justice to be truly realized in America?
Yeah. So I say that, maternal justice is something that I think it becomes just a clear representation of what's needed more generally on a national level. The fact that my first book was all about these three mothers, it's mothering and the way in which it's treated, kind of to go back to what I was saying with my mom, is that it relates to everything. And that's why it's necessary for us to focus in on it. But it actually gives us answers to how the nation could operate as a whole. And so I'll start by saying, when I'm talking about how do we dismantle American patriarchy and what is the vision for what we're trying to accomplish, what's sort of the opposite, if you will, of American patriarchy, I'm not saying that the opposite of American patriarchy is a nation where women have power over men. Although probably a lot more things would happen faster if that were the case, but that's not what I'm advocating for. I'm advocating for a nation where each of us has power to make decisions that best serve us, and that actually is American democracy. We actually haven't seen American democracy play out, because if we go back to this original social order that I'm describing, that didn't acknowledge that every person in the US was a person. And so we haven't ever experienced what democracy actually could be. So what I'm advocating for is democracy where power is vested in the people. That's the definition of democracy. And where power is vested in all of the people and our votes count. So we get to make decisions. Each of us has some power vested within us. And that is, if we can see that on the level of maternal justice, it would be that at every part of your relationship to even becoming pregnant, right? Having access to fertility treatments, right? Across the board, if it's something that people want to have access to right now, it's incredibly inequitable. Not everybody can afford it. Are there ways that we can make that more affordable across the board? Same as access to birth control. That's not equitable across the board currently. All of those things play into reproductive justice, maternal justice. When we get to choose to have children, should be equitable across the board. How we get care if we are pregnant. Can I see a midwife? Could my insurance company cover that in the same way that it covers me going into a hospital? Could I have concurrent care, which is something that I've always had. I've seen with my firstborn, there wasn't a midwife close enough to where we lived in Stockton, California. So I had the doulas working with me. And then I also went in, obviously, to see my OB because I was going to be delivering in a hospital with my doulas. But with my second and with my third, I had a midwife. And then I also went and saw my OB, mainly because I'm a researcher and I found it interesting to compare the two. But there are many patients who want to do both. Is that available? Is that possible? It should be. It's not that difficult. It's actually so much more expensive to see a doctor than it is to see a midwife. So it doesn't make sense, right? That insurance companies wouldn't cover it, but they can't make as much money. So that this is one of the reasons that it's not covered. And then the same, we have so many of the deaths that occur in this maternal mortality crisis happen in the few weeks and months after birth. And we see, again, one of the things that is present with midwifery and with doulas, and obviously I know I'm speaking to a bunch of birth workers, is that patients receive care, clients receive care in their home following a birth. So it's ridiculous, right, to like put your child into a car seat when you just gave birth and you're supposed to be taking them back and forth to a doctor. And I remember, because my second was born, I mean, they were both, okay, my first was born a little bit before the pandemic, but my second was born during the pandemic. And it was the time, if we all remember, when the unnecessary visits would happen on Zoom versus in person. And one of the visits that was deemed unnecessary was my checkup, my 6-week checkup. Even though we know from data that this is the window of time where a lot of things show up, blood clots, etc. So to deem that visit unnecessary, when again, obviously I was lucky. I had a doula and a midwife who were coming to check in on me in person. But had I not had them and something had come up, they wouldn't have caught it. So again, we have the data, we have all of the things that we need to know. It's just, can we meet each patient where they deserve to be met? Can we, bring more of this care that you have available to you in other nations, where someone will come to you versus asking this mother somehow to, well, really not recover, but let's just focus on the child. And I've written a lot about how we shift our attention entirely to the child in the US, and you see in other nations so many ceremonies and practices around the mother and her recovery, because it seems obvious that the better she's doing, the better her child will do. But in the US, we don't focus on mothers enough. So it's at every stage, can we give the options, and can we respect what that person wants for themselves and for their children?
Absolutely. And thank you so much for sharing that with us. But what I'm hearing is maternal justice here means that America is living up to who we say we are as a nation, and ensuring that we all have access to what this means to be American. So again, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for this brilliance. Y'all get these books, read these books, share these books with a friend. And again, thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much. Those were great questions. I loved this.
Trey stole my question. I don't have any questions. But thank you so much, Anna, for coming and for doing this talk. It was at times like emotional for me, just like when I read the Three Mothers book, and that's kind of how I found your work. I came across this book and I shared it with him, and he shared it with people. And so it was very, as a lactation consultant and a mother and a doula, it was very validating to listen to this talk. A lot of things that I heard were like, yes, yes, yes. And a lot of things were very empowering. And I just really thank you for everything and for coming here today.
Oh, look at your beautiful sleeping baby.
Yeah, she finally fell asleep. She was wild during the talk, though.
I love it. She's just great.
She was listening and engaged, but
Thank you all so much.